Did you know that even before Egypt raised its first pyramids, cities and writing already existed in Mesopotamia? Its name, Mesopotamia, means land between rivers. Some of the oldest and most astonishing cultures of humanity flourished between the Tigris and the Euphrates. How is it possible that in such an unstable territory so many cities, kingdoms, and empires were born? What drove them to raise colossal temples, to create writing, and to dream of gods who dwelled in the sky and the abyss? This is a timeline, but also a journey to the very origin of civilization. Because before Rome, before Greece, before even the great Chinese dynasties, Sumer already existed. And with Sumer came Uruk, Akkad, Babylon, Assyria. Names that still resonate like distant echoes of a history carved in clay and fire. We will discover how these cultures invented cuneiform writing, organized the first states, built legal codes, and dreamed of conquering eternity. Mesopotamia was not a single civilization, it was a constellation of cultures that rose, fell, and left behind a legacy that still breathes in the way we measure time, build cities, and imagine the heavens. This is their story. Long before the great empires rose and fell in the lands of Mesopotamia, there was a time when everything was just beginning to take shape. Amid the scorching heat and the alluvial plains of the south, small human groups discovered that mud, water, and will were enough to tame the land. It was there, between 6,500 and 3,800 BC, that the first culture to shape this region flourished. A culture without armies, without palaces, without gods carved in stone, but with a vision that would transform the world. Today we know it as the Ubaid culture. They built villages with mud brick houses and flat roofs, arranged around canals and crop fields. They mastered irrigation like no one before them. They learned to guide the waters of the Euphrates to nourish the arid land. And in doing so, they also nourished a society that was growing and becoming more complex. There are no great sculptures or temples that proclaim their existence, but they left behind more subtle clues, polished tools, figurines with elongated eyes and crossed hands, and the remains of the first communal temples, built not for a king, but for the people. Because in Ubaid, religion was not yet an instrument of power, but a form of cohesion. Little by little, these villages became connected to one another. Hierarchies emerged, specialized occupations appeared, and an exchange network that stretched from the Persian Gulf to northern Mesopotamia developed. It was the birth of something new. A world in which human order was beginning to impose itself over the chaos of nature. And although the names of their leaders were lost forever, and their walls dissolved under the rain, their legacy was the most important of all. They laid the foundations so that centuries later, cities, writing, and empires could be born. Without the Ubaid culture, history would have had no place to begin. For centuries, the inhabitants of Mesopotamia perfected the art of living together. They domesticated the land, learned to share water, to organize themselves, and then something changed. The size of villages was no longer enough. Plazas expanded, temples rose, and for the first time in human history, a city was born. Uruk was not just another settlement, it was a threshold. There, between 4000 and 3100 BC, the first great metropolis of humanity emerged. An urban center with walls, districts, temples, storehouses, workshops, roads, and thousands of people living under a single social structure. What began as a riverside village transformed into a revolution. In its plazas, the first ziggurats were erected, stepped temples that connected the sky with the earth, such as the one dedicated to Inanna, goddess of love, war, and fertility. Monuments of baked clay that were not simple structures, but symbols of the new order. From atop them, priests observed not only the firmament, but also the growing pulse of the city. Uruk also witnessed the birth of something even greater than its walls. The written word. It was not created to tell stories, but to count things. Records of trade, taxes, harvests, and offerings were inscribed on clay tablets with signs we now know as cuneiform. What began as an economic necessity soon became a cultural tool. Uruk was not an isolated world. From its markets, caravans departed toward distant regions, the mountainous north of Anatolia, the Elamite east in what is now Iran, and the shores of the Persian Gulf. They carried textiles, grain, and ceramics. In return, they brought copper, obsidian, precious stones, shells, and also ideas. Long-distance trade enriched not only storehouses, but also mines. The city transformed the way of living, working, and believing. Social classes were born. The first rulers with centralized authority emerged, and a new way of perceiving time took shape, not as something cyclical and ritual, but as a sequence that could be organized, counted, and recorded. Uruk was not only the first city, it was the first great mirror in which humanity saw itself as civilization, and its reflection, thousands of years later, still reaches us. Uruk was also the stage of the first great legends, such as that of King Gilgamesh, who defied the gods and sought to overcome death. After Uruk, Mesopotamia was never the same. What had begun as an urban revolution transformed into a network of independent city-states, each with its own temple, its own god, its own king. From these local beliefs, a shared pantheon gradually emerged. Enlil in Nippur, Inanna in Uruk, Nanna in Ur, gods who would later reign over all of Mesopotamia. It was a fragmented but vibrant land. A tapestry of cultures that competed, traded, and grew at the same time. Between 2900 and 2334 BC, names such as Ur, Kish, Lagash, Nippur, and once again Uruk filled the map of southern Mesopotamia. Cities surrounded by walls, connected by canals, organized around ziggurats that rose as the spiritual and political center of each community. There was no single empire, but dozens of small, proud, rival kingdoms. Each city had its own history, and some of them left behind the first written records of armed conflict. In Lagash, for example, a war against the neighboring city of Umma was documented over the control of land and canals. These were not imperial conquests, but local disputes. Yet they were already wars, and they were the first to be recorded. Amid this turbulence, the Sumerians developed some of the most transformative tools of humanity: the wheel, the plow, and a mathematical system based on the number 60 that we still use today to measure time. They also refined writing, which no longer recorded only accounts, but also myths, hymns, laws, and prayers. Clay tablets became libraries of thought, temples became centers of economic and cultural power, and kings became figures who not only ruled, but claimed to be chosen by the gods. During this time, the Sumerian king list also emerged, an ancient document that blended history and myth and sought to organize the lineage of kings extending back to legendary times. But amid so much progress, tensions also arose, because wealth breeds ambition, and power attracts those who seek more. Cities began to look at each other not only as neighbors, but as threats. And so, in the same land where civilization was born, the long history of organized warfare also began. It was an era of brilliant achievements and early conflicts, of inventions that crossed centuries and rivalries that shaped the destiny of an entire continent. The Sumerian cities wrote the first chapters of history, and also its first wounds. For centuries, the Sumerian cities competed with one another, without any of them managing to fully prevail, until a man appeared who would change the rules of the game. His name was Sargon, and he wasn't Sumerian. He came from Akkad, a city located north of Lower Mesopotamia. Of humble origin, he was abandoned in a basket on the river, according to legend. Sargon did not merely rise to power, he founded the first great empire in history. Around 2334 BC, Sargon unified the city-states under a single rule and extended his control from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. He was the first to build a centralized administration, to maintain a professional army, and to impose a lingua franca for bureaucracy, Akkadian. The Mesopotamian world ceased to be a mosaic and became an imperial structure. From his capital, Akkad, whose exact location remains a mystery, Sargon ruled firmly. He delegated power to governors, controlled trade routes, and used religion as a tool of legitimacy. Unlike earlier kings, he was no longer simply a representative of the gods, he was seen almost as one of them. His grandson, Naram-Sin, took the empire to its highest point. He was the first to proclaim himself king of the four corners of the world, and to portray his figure as divine on stelae. But that ambition came at a cost. Over time, control weakened. Regions began to rebel, battered by internal crises, famines, and an increasingly ineffective administration. In the midst of that power vacuum, from the mountains of the northeast descended the Gutians, people considered barbarian by Sumerian records. They did not speak the Akkadian language, nor did they follow its laws. They looted temples, destroyed canals, and fragmented what had once been an organized network of cities. Their arrival brought not only violence, but also a temporary economic and cultural collapse. Toward 2154 BC, the Akkadian Empire collapsed. The tablets shifted from glory to lament. What Sargon forged in life crumbled after his death. But his legacy was irreversible. The idea of an empire, of a central authority ruling over many cities, had been born. And it wouldn't stop repeating itself. Mesopotamia learned that power could be a single voice, but that the echo of chaos was always close. After the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, Mesopotamia entered an uncertain period. Cities fragmented once again, trade declined, and written records grew scarce. But even amidst chaos, the memory of civilization remained alive. And it was from the south, from the ancient city of Ur, that this memory began to take shape once more. In 2112 BC, a new leader emerged, Ur-Nammu. Under his rule began what we now know as the Sumerian Renaissance, led by the third dynasty of Ur. This was not an empire of conquest, but of reconstruction. Ur-Nammu understood that power was not imposed only by force, but also through order. He promulgated one of the earliest written legal codes we know of, predating even the famous Code of Hammurabi. In it, the law ceased to be a divine interpretation and became an instrument of justice, applied according to clear rules established by the king. During his reign and that of his son Shulgi, the state was meticulously reorganized. Irrigation canals were improved, measures and weights were standardized, agricultural production was encouraged, and detailed economic archives were created, such as the records from Pozorish Dagan, where state goods were administered with unprecedented precision. Cities were once again connected not only by roads and canals, but by a shared vision. Ur shone brightly. Its ziggurat dominated the landscape, a temple dedicated to Nana, the moon god, so imposing that thousands of years later, it still stands as the last great witness to Sumerian glory. Temples filled with offerings and clay tablets once again told stories of achievement instead of lament. It seemed the Sumerians had regained control of their destiny. But stability did not last. Gradually, neighboring peoples began to press against its borders. The Amorites arrived from the west, the Elamites from the east. Internal tensions grew, and the administration that once held everything together began to fracture. In 2004 BC, Ur was sacked, and with it ended the last great flowering of Sumerian power. Despite its fall, its influence did not vanish. Even in ruins, its model of statehood, its architecture, its laws, and its administration would live on in the cultures that followed. The Sumerian Renaissance was not the end. It was the echo of a civilization that refused to die. And although it would never shine again under its own name, its essence would live on in the empires to come. In the midst of the void left by the fall of Ur, new powers began to emerge on the Mesopotamian horizon. Among them, one city slowly gained strength, almost in silence. It did not yet have the fame of Uruk or the tradition of Nippur, but it possessed something else: a strategic location, ambition, and Hammurabi. Under his leadership, between 1792 and 1750 BC, Babylon went from being just another kingdom to becoming the new center of the Mesopotamian world. Hammurabi was not only a skilled conqueror, he was also a brilliant politician and a tireless reformer. Through alliances, military campaigns, and effective administration, he managed to unify most of southern and central Mesopotamia under a single throne. But his legacy was not only military. Hammurabi is remembered for something even more transcendent: his famous code. A stone stele carved with 282 laws that regulated everything from trade and property to marriage and criminal justice. There, the concept of an eye for an eye emerges, alongside rules protecting the weak from the strong. It was a declaration of authority, but also of responsibility. The Code of Hammurabi was not merely a set of rules. It was a manifestation of the order that was meant to prevail. It was not hidden in temples. It was placed in public squares. It was not exclusive to scribes. It was meant to be seen by everyone. And although not everyone could read, its very presence was a reminder that the law stood above whim. It is believed that it was originally placed in the city of Sippar, and centuries later it was found in Susa. Carried off as booty by the Elamites, even his enemies recognized its symbolic power. During his reign, Babylon flourished. Trade routes were strengthened, agriculture was promoted, temples were restored, and knowledge was encouraged. The Akkadian language began to assert itself as the language of diplomacy, and the Babylonian model of political and institutional organization became a reference in the centuries that followed. When Hammurabi died, he left behind more than an empire, he left an idea. The idea that a city could rule through laws, not only through swords. Over time, his empire fragmented and was defeated by the Hittites, but the legacy of Babylon was etched into history. Its influence did not end with the fall of its walls, it was only beginning. For many centuries, to speak of Babylon was to speak of civilization. Its name endured in the Bible, in myth, and in the memory of the ancient world as an emblem of splendor and power. For centuries, northern Mesopotamia lived in the shadow of the great empires of the south. But slowly, a new power began to shape its destiny with a different logic, a different force, and a different vision of power. It was Assyria, and its history would become one of conquest, expansion, and relentless domination. From cities such as Ashur and later Nineveh, the Assyrians built an empire unlike any before. Its foundation was not diplomacy, trade, or law, it was the army. Between the 14th and 7th centuries BC, the Assyrians developed an unprecedented military machine. They mastered the use of iron, organized standing armies, employed war chariots, battering rams, siege engines, and a logistical network that allowed them to conquer territories stretching from Egypt to Persia. Yet their power did not rest on weapons alone. The Assyrians also understood how to project power. They carved their victories into monumental reliefs, adorned palaces with scenes of war, many depicting executions and public punishments, with a clear purpose: to instill fear, exert psychological control, and send an unmistakable message to their enemies. Resistance was futile. They ruled with an iron fist, but also with an efficient administration that included censuses, centralized taxation, and extensive road networks. Among their rulers, Ashurbanipal stands out, not only for his military campaigns, but for something far less expected: his devotion to knowledge. In his palace at Nineveh, he gathered thousands of clay tablets, forming the library of Ashurbanipal, one of the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. It preserved texts on astronomy, medicine, religious rituals, and mythology, written in several Mesopotamian languages. Thanks to this collection, fundamental works such as the Epic of Gilgamesh have survived. But even the most feared empires fall. Over time, provinces rebelled, alliances collapsed, and from the east and the south rose two new enemies, the Medes and the Neo-Babylonians. In 612 BC, the great city of Nineveh was destroyed. What once seemed indestructible crumbled in only a few years. Yet the Assyrian legacy did not vanish. Their architecture, military strategies, systems of rule, and imperial ambition would be studied, imitated, and feared for centuries. The roar of Assyria, though silenced, was never forgotten. Even the Persians who followed adopted elements of Assyrian imperial organization. After the fall of the Assyrian Empire, power shifted once again. From the ruins, an ancient city rose with renewed force: Babylon. Under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar II, it became once more the heart of the Mesopotamian world, this time with greater splendor than ever before. During his reign from 605 to 562 BC, Nebuchadnezzar undertook an ambitious program of urban transformation. He rebuilt temples, expanded city walls, and adorned streets with glazed reliefs. Babylon filled with color, geometric forms, and monumental gates such as the Ishtar Gate, decorated with lions and bulls in vivid blue. Today, part of this gate can be seen reconstructed in Berlin's Pergamon Museum, a testament to Babylon's aesthetic power. The city became a symbol of authority, order, and beauty. Among its wonders, the most legendary was perhaps the one that still divides historians: the Hanging Gardens. According to some accounts, they were built for his wife, who longed for the mountains of her homeland. Terrace upon terrace, trees and flowers rose on them as if suspended in the air, sustained by a complex irrigation system. Although their existence has never been proven with certainty, the image of these gardens has endured as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But Nebuchadnezzar's legacy was not only architectural, it was also cultural. During his reign, Babylon became a center of astronomical, religious, and administrative knowledge. Astronomical tablets were refined, ancient texts were compiled, and a bureaucratic system of remarkable complexity was established. Yet no empire is eternal. After Nebuchadnezzar's death, his successors failed to preserve unity. In 539 BC, the Persian king Cyrus the Great entered Babylon without the need for a major military siege. According to contemporary accounts, he was welcomed by part of the population as a liberator. With his arrival, a new chapter began: Persian rule over Mesopotamia. And although Babylon ceased to be the capital of an empire, its image was etched forever as an emblem of wealth, wisdom, and grandeur. Its name echoed even in biblical texts, as a symbol of earthly power and spiritual trial for subjected peoples. Even in its fall, it remained a symbol, for Babylon was not only a city, it was an idea. Mesopotamia was not merely the place where civilization was born, it was the starting point for many of the ideas that still shape our lives today. Writing was invented there, the earliest laws were drafted, cities were planned, and the stars were studied to measure time. It was the first time humanity dared to impose order on the world through symbols, calculations, and structured systems. When we sign a contract, follow a calendar, divide an hour into minutes, or simply walk through a city with carefully laid out streets, we are, without realizing it, walking in the footsteps of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria. Their legacy is not only archaeological, it is part of everyday life. Mesopotamia is not just an ancient chapter of history. It is the beginning of a legacy that continues to live on in every civilization that followed. If this journey changed the way you see the past, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because history is not dead. It is simply waiting to be heard.